All right, so here we are. We're going to jump into it. So our conversation tonight, our topic is Hello 2021, our writerly resolutions. I actually wish I had said intentions instead, because I've had a lot of people explain to me how stressful the word resolutions is and how much more sort of positive, I guess, intentions are. So we're going to consider that the new title for tonight, Hello 2021, our writerly intentions. I'm going to introduce our three panelists, and then I'm going to get rid of this screen so you guys will see everyone's face at the same time. But here we go. Amy Gentry is the author of the best-selling thriller Good Is Gone, a New York Times notable book, and Last Woman Standing, as well as the nonfiction Tori Amos's Boys for Pele, and the upcoming Bad Habits, which is publishing on February 2nd. She's also a book reviewer and essayist whose work has appeared in numerous outlets, including Salon, the Paris Review, the Los Angeles Review of Books, and the Austin Chronicle. She holds a PhD in English and lives in Austin, Texas. So just virtually in the chat box, if you'll give it up to Amy Gentry. Thanks for being here, Amy.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Richard Z Santos is a writer and teacher in Austin. His debut novel, Trust Me, was published in March 2020. He's a board member of the National Book Critics Circle and served as one of the 2019 nonfiction judges for the Kirkus Prize. Recent work can be found in Texas Monthly, Ost Press, Kirkus Reviews, Crime Reads, and many more. In a previous career, he worked for some of the nation's top political campaigns, consulting firms, and labor unions. Please give it up for Richard Santos. Thank you, Richard. We're glad to have you. And last but not least, Sherry Thomas is the author of 19 novels across multiple genres, including the acclaimed Lady Sherlock mystery series, a YA fantasy trilogy that began with The Burning Sky, and more than a dozen romance novels, which have twice won her the Romance Writers of America's prestigious Rita Award. Born in China, she learned English as a second language, and she is an amazing instructor and a wonderful panelist, and we're excited to have her here tonight. So thank you, Sherry, for being here.
Thank you.
All right, let's get rid of this screen. Here we go. I'm going to gallery view. Okay, so, all right. I think we can all agree, perhaps, that the idea of New Year's resolutions is can be stressful. It can create a lot of pressure on us. Some people are very into it. They're going to write down their intentions or their resolutions, whether they look at them again throughout the year or not. And then some folks are very not into it, shall we say. So I just want to know who I'm talking to tonight as we get into the conversation. And so first, before we dive into specifics, who are you, Amy Gentry? Are you someone who makes New Year's resolutions, or are you not? Tell us your relationship with this, even this idea of New Year, New You.
Yeah, I mean, I think it has a little bit more traction this year than most years because it does feel like a new year in many ways. I mean, there's certain changes afoot that make it feel like a very different year than last year. At the same time, we're still, very much, I think, weighed down by a lot of the baggage from last year. So I don't actually usually, to answer your first question, I don't usually have New Year's resolutions at all. However, I do set intentions regularly as part of my writing practice. And this year in particular, I did do extra reflecting on New Year's, but I can talk about that more specifically later. So I will say yes and no.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Sherry, what about you?
My answer will be no and no.
All right, so no the resolutions.
Partly is because of my deadlines. For some reason, my first book came out in 2008. I sold my first book in 2006. So since 2007, every year around the end of the year, I've been on deadlines without fail for some reason. It doesn't matter what time of the year my books come out. somehow I always end up on deadline right around December, November, December, and January, sometimes going to February, March. So I'm just trying to survive at the end of the year. There's no time at all to think about resolutions. And by the time the book is done, like, what more resolutions do you need? Just like, enjoy your summer.
I love it. We're going to circle back to that.
But I'm also trying to do something different this year. So we'll talk about that later.
Oh, good. Okay, wonderful. Richard, what about you? Come on. I'm counting on you, Richard.
I don't write down any sort of resolutions. To me, I feel like that would be like too much pressure. Or I would just like, that's how I will definitely disappoint myself if I find my letter to myself 6 months later. But I do always like, I feel like I'm going to contradict myself a lot in this conversation tonight, but I do always like, whether I want to or not, find myself reflecting at the end of the year, the beginning of the new year, like, you know, as much as part of me wants to be like, oh, it's just an arbitrary how we decide to count the days in this particular culture. Yeah, sure. But like, I can't help but kind of reflect on some of that and kind of set mental intentions. All right, is probably the best way to do it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's good to know. Thank you. I'm glad to know who I'm working with.
Are you going to fire us all now and replace us?
You invited the wrong people.
What about you, Becca? Becca, do you have them?
You know, I first of all, I'm going to speak very little except to ask you guys questions, but I will say that I used to be very pro New Year's resolutions. And then I realized that I never actually held myself accountable. So it felt like they weren't really doing anything more than just giving me something fun to do on December 31st while I drink champagne. So, but I'm coming around to some ideas about intentions. So, but in all seriousness, so I think about this topic and I think about it, you know, obviously we often, I think our resolutions or our intentions, if we're making them, have to do with, you know, the larger world, life, personal things. I mean, there's nothing more personal, of course, than being a writer and what you're working on as well. But I think sometimes that what perhaps the intentions come when we have something, when we have a goal in mind, an endpoint in mind, right? So perhaps that's not on January 1st, perhaps that's when we embark on a new project, or when we say, this is the year I'm going to publish in a literary journal. So now I'm going to create those intentions with that goal in mind. So to switch gears a little bit, I guess I would wonder about that, about goal setting. So less about, this is the big change I'm going to make this year, this is the big what have you, but more about setting goals and how each of you as a writer approaches that piece of it, which I feel like is a different question. And I hope you agree with me. Now I'm circling back to you again, Amy. Goals.
Okay. I think they are related, or they can be, but yeah, I tend to have sort of 3-month check-ins. I don't do this by the calendar, but I just tend to think of my big life, you know, in 3-month chunks, like quarters. So when I think about goals, you know, I'm usually thinking on several different scales at once. And like the bigger goals have these 3-month, you know, I try to break them down into 3-month chunks. So like, what could I sort of reasonably hope to accomplish in 3 months? You know, and when it comes to tackling specific goals, like writing goals that I need to get through for a deadline or something, that's a different matter. I mean, I journal every day, and one thing I try to do in my journal nearly every day, I guess, is just think through, like, you know, and write out like what I'm planning to do that day. Sometimes I go back and number them if I, you know, in the text, but I don't always. I just kind of write it out first thing when I get up, and I find that helps kind of focus my intentions a little bit. But yeah, in terms of the big year goals, you know, I think this year I feel a little bit differently about it. In past years, I've wanted to get a draft of the next project done, or I've wanted to maybe connect with this, these three people that I'm really interested in their work or something. But this year, I feel like partly because of how last year was, I feel like my goal is much more open-ended, and rather than having a specific goal, I'm more just, my overall goal is to be really open and just allow myself to do whatever I want to this coming year, writing wise, whatever genre, whatever, I've started to experiment with different forms like short stories. Who knows, maybe I'll write poetry. I just think for me, this past year has been really different because, I guess I started to think a lot about what are we all doing? What are we doing and why are we doing it? Maybe it's also partly where I am in my career. I'm kind of starting to get into that early middle phase of my career. So maybe I'm just thinking more like, well, what direction do I want to go in? But I think also I just had this feeling during lockdown in those months last year, like, well, if we can't write whatever we want in a pandemic, when can we write it? And I'd like to take the expectations off myself for what exactly I'll do next. And that's my biggest one.
Sherry, what about you? What about goals versus resolutions?
I don't formally do either, but as I look back on the couple of big changes that I made in my life in the last few years, one, I took up exercising, and the second, I took up bullet journal. I hadn't done any kind of continuous journaling since I was in middle school. So those were big changes, and they've both been going on for about since the middle of 2017. As I said, in winter, right around New Year's time, I can't possibly make any resolutions because my hair is on fire during those months. So I look back, I see that it's usually in summer that I make my changes. And what I found out when I look at those two big changes that I actually did and stuck is basically you ride the horse in the direction it's going. So in terms of exercising, my husband took up exercising about 10 years before I did. Then I look at his sister, his brother-in-law also took up, exercising. And then his sister, who used to be a couch potato just like myself, took up exercising. And finally, I heard this one piece, somebody saying on the radio that all you need for exercising is 20 minutes, 3 times a week of cardio. And I was like, I can do that. I can do that. It took me half a year to go from not be able to run at all to being able to run 20 minutes. Mm. And I still only run 20 minutes when I run, but I do it every other day when I'm not on deadline. So it was kind of the larger forces was kind of pushing me toward it. And then I heard a doable, fairly easy way. And I gave myself a ton of time. Mm-hmm. And I don't really say anything to myself because I think I must be an unusual person among writers in which self-blame is kind of not in my vocabulary. It's like not my vernacular. It's like, what am I blaming myself for? I didn't run. That's like no big deal.
I love it.
And so that's how it stuck. Just like very, very gradually, like you would train a kid to walk. So my other big thing, now that I've been looking at my life, reflection forced upon me by coming to this panel, because otherwise there's no time to reflect in winter, is I tend to shut down during deadlines. And by shut down, I don't mean my brain shuts down, although sometimes it does that also. But I stop doing most things. I stop exercising. At some point, I'll stop cooking. I stop all housework. I stop, now that my kids are grown. But basically, kids were the only thing that their needs was the only thing that got through. That I did not throw them out of the door when I'm on deadline. But otherwise, everything shuts down. All the good habits shut down. Bullet journal also does not get touched for like 2 months. And there's actually never been a reason for it. There's never been a reason for it. I actually do not work more on deadline than I do at any other point. I don't. I sit there, I surf the internet, and I play games. It's just that stopping those things to do something else make me panic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So my resolution, goal, or project to slowly tackle is how to do everything else and work when I'm on deadline, because it's not the hours that make a difference. It's just my state of mind. So that's what your panel has got me to think about, and that's what I've decided to tackle. It may take me 4 or 5 years to get any result out of it, but
there's so much here to work with. And I want to just take a beat, because I definitely want to circle back to the first thing, especially getting into exercise and that idea of breaking it down into something that felt possible versus, hey, Sherry, you should start exercising. Why don't you run a marathon?
right, yeah.
Instead,
Sherry is never running a marathon.
Which sometimes, as writers, even at the beginning of the year, you know, how many writers say, this is the year I'm going to write a novel. And, but saying instead, this is the year that 3 times a week, 20 minutes a day, I'm going to sit down and whatever comes out, comes out. But I'm going to give myself that time to slowly ease into the experience. There's so much you just said that we're going to definitely be circling back to.
You can take 6 months to work up to that writing 20 minutes continuously.
Yeah, for sure. Richard, what about you? What about this whole like conversation about, you know, goal setting versus resolutions and what you're thinking for yourself this year?
Yeah. No, this is great. This is just hearing this has been great already. I like Sherry's response a lot too, and feel like I might have some similarities there. But I've been all over the place personally in terms of like setting real like strict accountability, and then throwing it all away. And I think that kind of alternating between those phases has been like a huge part of my development as a writer, such as it is. Like there have been times where have been really, really successful at like hand writing 2 pages a day. And then at a certain, I mean, why did I do that? I think back, I forgot I did that because it made sense for that particular 2 or 3 months. And then other times just kind of whenever it comes up. And I think for me, I feel like it's almost like the switching back and forth between like strict goals, lots of accountability versus get off my back, self, I'll do it later. I think maybe that's part of how I work. And that's kind of how I do other things too. Like go and exercise. Well, maybe, but the yoga studio is doing, if you do 20 classes in 35 days, you get a free sticker. Well, hell yeah, I'm gonna check myself off every time. And then
stickers are really motivating, by the way.
Until like I'm finished, and then I'm like, yoga's stupid. I'm not doing yoga ever again. Or like I do the handwriting 2 pages a day, and I do that, and it's amazing. And then at a certain point, I'm like, no. And whatever else the next kind of accountability is. I've done the marks on a calendar by my desk. That's great. It really works until like I like turn on my own system in some sort of weird way. And so it's almost like letting myself do that maybe is important.
Are you a Gemini?
I'm a Taurus.
But you know, I mean, I always wonder when people talk about strict accountability with themselves, like, what do you really mean anyway? I mean, what are you gonna like smack yourself on the hand? Like, I think one of the things about goal setting that is a real thing we have to come to is that it's for us, you know? I mean, it's not, there's nobody like standing over you with a stick. And I think like what you said, Richard, about, you know, you do it for a while and it works for a while and then it doesn't work anymore for that, you know, your life changes and now you need something different. And part of it is just like being in touch with yourself enough to just like let that go, take a moment of mindfulness, check in with yourself and be like, well, where am I now? Like, what can I do now? You know, is it 20 minutes a day or is it something else? And I think like, getting rid of the blame and like the shame associated with failing is a huge part of kind of real continuous, intentionality, rather than thinking of like necessarily specific goals. Goals are useful, but if they're not useful, you can just throw them out. They're disposable unless you have a deadline, then you have to meet it. But when I was in grad school, I had this this little mini revelation about like the carrot and the stick. And I was like, from now on, I will only use carrots, not sticks, right? Because I was constantly trying to get myself to write my dissertation. And there was so much shame in the avoidance that, the avoidance started building up. It ends up sabotaging the goals you set. And I discovered the link between like punitive accountability measures and reward accountability measures. So, if it was something nice, like, for example, I get a sticker, I get a cupcake, or, what I've started to do lately is try to always find, if the goal itself is pleasurable, like if the exercise is enjoyable and you like it, then you will do it because it will be its own reward. So, packing the reward into the experience really helps me. So like Sherry, I can't run. I used to run actually a lot, but it became this weird like shame cycle for me and I just wasn't enjoying it. And so now I swim at Barton Springs and that's my exercise. And I crave it. Yeah, it's beautiful. And part of the experience for me is just seeing, like just literally seeing it every time. That's the carrot. And there's no stick. If I don't go, the only stick is that, the only punishment is that I missed my chance to see Barton Springs and be in the water that I love. So anyway, that's my carrot and stick philosophy is like my big contribution, guys.
May I?
Oh yeah,
may
sure.
just get. I feel like what we talk about in the even though nobody said it, and Amy, no, actually you both said it, but not in so many words. Setting resolutions and watching or intentions and watching yourself execute or not is actually part of getting to know yourself. Like, what kind of person are you? What motivates you? What can you accept about yourself? What can't you accept about yourself? I noticed when I was a teenager, every night I used to go to, we used to live on the university campus because my mom was a grad student. Every night I would go to the campus library to study, to university library to study. And I noticed I always go there full of intentions about I'm going to do this, and that, and third. And I noticed it's like most of the time I can only accomplish 50%. Not only I only end up doing 50% of what I set out to do. If I do 2/3 of what I set out to do, it's a really good night. So like back when I was a teenager, I already realized, I'm not getting that much done. I really am not.
but
I made my peace with it then and have never looked back since.
That's amazing that you would say that you would claim that having written 19 novels, you don't get very much done, Sherry.
Not on my own initiative. I get a lot done.
Okay.
If there's somebody, something breathing down my back, I get a lot more done. But that's a different thing. That's when you actually, you don't have to hold yourself accountable anymore. Somebody else will come and hold you accountable. Then so in my professional life, I've been searching for that outside accountability, so to hand it off to somebody else. Yeah.
So the three of you are all accomplished writers. You have started things and finished them. I consider that a big accomplishment, but you've also put these things out into the world and in various forms, and you continue to do it. So I guess for the writers who are listening, who are here tonight, not only to obviously work through some stuff with us in the panel about resolutions and other things, but more, to start to think about their own, how they learn about themselves as writers and figure out what does work for them and what doesn't. I guess I would ask each of you, what are some systems that have worked for you? You know, it sounds like, Amy, one of the things that really works for you is waking up in the morning and making that, you know, sort of mental and also on the page list of things that you're thinking about doing as a writer. And, you know, Richard, you mentioned doing the long form occasionally, sometimes for a few days, and maybe that, I don't know if that jostles something or if it helps you, but what are some of those, I guess, some of the specific things you might mention to the folks listening that they could try out? It might not work for them. It's not going to fit for everyone, but that you've just over the course of your time as a writer have used to get you into the space or to get past that deadline or any number of other things. Richard, I'm looking at your head, so I'm going to ask you first.
Yeah. I feel like I've been most productive when I can wake up and go straight to it, which is hard because, you know, kids teaching, when I was teaching high school, like for me to do that, I have to get up like 5 a.m. And that's really hard to maintain. But for me, there is a big difference in like the level of focus and just the amount that I can just kind of relax into what I'm doing. It's hard with like my Twitter addiction and all of our general news addictions. It's a little bit harder, but you know, maybe just a quick check, and then just try to relax, just go straight into it. That makes a big difference, I think. Other people are different. You know, you might find different times, but it's the pattern of it, right? Of like, you know, try waking up at 5 a.m. And if that doesn't work, then try staying up till midnight. And try it for like, you know, a couple of weeks, experiment, move that around a little bit, 2 days a week, 5 days a week, 6, whatever, 3, who knows? You kind of have to figure that out on your own. In terms of keeping that momentum going, I think I've heard Amy say this before too. I'm a big fan of who was this? I don't know, it was one of those old dead guys. Like the trick was like, write the first sentence of the next scene or the next chapter when you're done for the day. That way, when you sit down the next day, your brain's been thinking about that sentence and where that scene is going to go, and you've already started. It's like a little gift from past you, and you've got one sentence down for the day already, and just keep going that way. I think that's a really effective. Like, it feels like a trick. It feels like one of those like one easy trick, but I think that really works.
I love it. Amy, what about you?
Well, so I want to clarify about this list thing, because I agree with Richard. Getting up first thing in the morning is by far the best thing for me. And I will get up at like 5 or sometimes even 4, you know, not every day, but a lot of days now that I have a kid, to get that little bit of space. But really what it's for is not so much list making as journaling. And I basically do morning pages, the Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way. I did a book a long time ago. I highly recommend it. It's very woo-woo, but it really changed my practice in a lot of ways. So morning pages are just kind of 3 pages longhand of just like word vomit. They're for clearing your brain and getting your motor going. And I use them in particular as like a feelings dump because I found that a lot of times when I'm avoiding the page or I'm super stressed out and I feel too stressed to write, or I can't focus, or I'm procrastinating. Oftentimes there's actually like some feeling there that I'm maybe not in touch with that is pushing me away from wanting to work. And doing this kind of just writing through the feelings, as I call it, you know, and sometimes it's just, what did I dream last night? What is this dream that's like clogging up my brain? And getting it on paper kind of starts the wheels moving, or it's just kind of, it's almost like hygienic, you know, it's a cleanse of the brain. And then toward the end, it will tend to just resolve itself into more of like a, you know, well, this is what I'm hoping to accomplish today. And occasionally it even actually drifts into scene writing. And so I've actually started, when I am either on a deadline or I'm really trying to push a writing binge, like a draft, and I have, you know, I'm on a retreat or something and I have 12 free hours and I really want to like go the whole time, I will actually integrate that into my day. So I'll do it before a scene, I'll do it at the end of each writing session and at the beginning of the next one, kind of talk about, oh, well, so this is what I just wrote. Okay, well, maybe next I'll write this. I'm feeling nervous because I don't know where this character is going, but I just write about it until I kind of write it out. And I find that kind of almost it can mimic the sense that Richard is talking about of letting your brain just sort of relax and work on the problem in a low stakes environment before you're taking it to the page. So that's my big thing. And Pomodoro. Also, does everybody know about the Pomodoro technique, where you set a timer for 25 minutes and then a timer for 5 minutes at the end? You work in 25-minute increments with a 5-minute break built in. And a 25-minute increment is somehow, it just is so manageable feeling, much more so than half an hour or an hour. And you can always make yourself write for 25 minutes or do any kind of work for 25 minutes. It just feels small, but it very quickly adds up. And yeah, that's it. And, anytime I sit down thinking, oh, I don't really have much time to get very far into this, that's when I get a lot of writing done. I trick myself into thinking I don't have very much time, and then everything comes out. So anyway, those two things are my techniques.
I love that you mentioned the artist way, because I do think that there is still something, and Richard mentioned this at the start. There is something about the new year where we crave, like, maybe this blank page, for lack of a better way of phrasing it, this blank year in front of me. What can I do with it? There's so much possibility. And I think even if you're just here because you're wanting to think about how to set those intentions, whatever they may be, I think The Artist's Way is a great book to read at the beginning of the year, because if you've never read it before, it will give you some tools, but it's also just a wonderful way to kind of seep and really like sink into your creativity for the year. I love it. Sherry, what about you? You're a deadline-driven woman, it sounds like. Am I right there?
I am. Yeah, there are things I will do for deadlines I will not do for love or money. Yeah, so, because writing, the writing process really sucks. It's a lot of hard work and your brain hurts. And
yeah. So let's think about
and money. If I really wanted to make money, I should write more. That's what I should do. But I never write more.
So let's think about you and your deadlines, because I have been known to set deadlines for myself that have nothing to do with actual people knocking on my door and saying, I gave you money, so you have to come back and give me these pages by this date. But I do try to trick myself into thinking like there's something about that date that I have to meet. And so when you're doing that, for the writers who might want to set those kind of deadlines for themselves, how are you reaching that deadline? Besides, I know you've talked about shutting off like certain parts of your life and not focusing on some of the things, the day-to-day things, but in the writing itself, are there tools or tricks that you use to, when you sit down, to get those words on the page and reach that deadline?
We're going to start getting too deeply into the craft of writing, but the only trick that I've
too deep into the craft of writing here with a text.
But it's also very individual, because for me it's done in drafts. A book comes together in draft. The first draft is no good. The second draft is still no good. The third draft, you can beginning to see the book take shape. The fourth draft, which is why I'm on deadline for so long, because all I can do is produce a draft and then turn around immediately go back to work the same draft because it's still not where it's supposed to be. I work on the big things first, because that's where my problem lies, whether a book holds together plot-wise. So if a book holds together plot-wise, if you're a romance writer, when I say plot, characters included, because in romance, sometimes character is plot. So if your characters went in the wrong direction. That's what you need to work out in the first 2 or 3 drafts. And only then you get around to the smaller things, the scene level, the prose, the more like finer character interaction, sussing all the emotions out of it. So that's kind of my process. What I have learned is I cannot speed it up. Sorry for everybody out there I cannot speed it up, and I cannot do a good job on the first run through. There have been several times with this particular book included when I pushed the first draft all the way to like 50, 60, almost nearly 60,000 words. And as with a couple of years ago, and as with now, I noticed that I can only use about 30 to 35,000 out of this 50-some thousand words, which is a lot better than when I used to throw out like 100,000 words at a go, because they were just so deadly wrong.
Well, I think
part of yeah, like I said, you have to know who you are as a writer.
Yeah.
And just writing words for words' sake really don't work for me, because I'll be like, ooh, another 1,000 in, and not realizing like, you know, it's tilting totally, like the ship is listing in the water, basically, as I would just like, you know, playing the band leader on the deck.
Well, and I think you are giving a couple of great suggestions to folks. First of all, to release that idea that the first draft has to be perfect, or that it has to be close to perfect, and that
I don't want to tell people that they can never do it. There's some people who fiddle around a lot at the beginning. They don't write full drafts. One of my friends, once she can get past chapter 3, she can push all the way through, and it's pretty close to the final form. I'm just not a writer like that.
Right.
So for everybody, the process is different. And as for concrete advice, the only thing that worked concretely for me once when I was really, really stuck, was I decided I had bought some pretty fonts online and installed on my computer. So when I couldn't write anymore, I would change fonts. I would change to the fanciest, swirliest, cutest fonts. And I would also choose all kinds of really wonderful pastel colors. So there will be like pages of this manuscript written in like, you know, every other paragraph is pink, yellow, blue, you know, purple. So I'm just like, just because I want to see the font, I'm putting some words down. And if you do that for a while, it kind of does get you going. You do really, as a professional writer, you really have to force yourself sometimes.
I assume there's some kind of brain science happening there as well about seeing the different colors drop down. So we had a question, and I want to pose it in some ways to you guys in a slightly different form, and then go back to the question itself, which is, are there other people in your life that when you're thinking about your writerly intentions for the year, or getting to that goal and getting to that project, who in your community, or what kind of community do you develop around reaching goals as a writer as well? So I guess, you know, the simplest question would be, do you have a writing group? Do you have critique partners, or do you have other people who help you with accountability in some way? Amy, you're smiling, so I'm going to you.
I have a writing group, and I love them so much that I always want to talk about them. But yeah, my writing group is like why I finished my first novel. I still lean on them heavily for pretty much every project at some point during the project. Although now I'm writing, I have deadlines now, external deadlines. So I write too fast for them to keep up with everything I write, but I'll go to them with a whole draft and ask them to read, or a scene that I'm having trouble with. It's just a group of people that we were all writing novels, trying to write our first novels at the same time, and we're all in different genres, which I think is, for me, so great. It feels really, there's something really refreshing about having that different mix of writing personalities in the group. And we meet weekly, which is, I mean, we try. We used to meet, rigorously weekly for years and years. And now then we started having kids and such. So it's a little bit less than that now, but we still keep up, Zoom meetings as regularly as we can make ourselves. And if we're not going to meet, we still text around and set intentions for the next week. And it's just, to me, that is so essential. Not like in a workshop way or like a critique group per se, although we often do critique each other and we ask for and give sometimes very harsh feedback, but it's much more about the trust and cheerleading and support group aspect of it, because a novel is such a long, long project, and a writing life is hopefully a long one too. And you just, you need sometimes to feel that someone is hearing the words that you're writing, and that they're not going to judge you if those words are utter crap, Mm-hmm. So, and yeah, I mean, it's like once you've been together for a while, everybody just knows each other's writing so intimately that we're able to sometimes give each other feedback that even a brilliant editor can't always hit on. We're like each other's projects, aunts and uncles, kind of. So yeah, that's been great. And I always tell people, like, if there's any way you can find even one person, two or more who can make that kind of a commitment, even just setting that weekly goal of meeting is a huge mental switch. It means that you are committing to showing up for other people's work and for your own. So
how did you meet your writing group?
Well, my husband's friend actually was, she knew that I was a writer. I was freelancing, and she had read some of my work, and she just knew me sort of through him, and asked him if she could sort of ask me if I wanted to get into her group she was starting. So I was not the impetus for this, but then I knew someone, and I pulled in someone that I knew would probably be interested. And then that person pulled in someone, and we ended up with like I think 5. We've been 6 and 5 over the years, but it's kind of the same core group of people. And yeah, it just, I don't know. I think if you're a writer, other writers, even if you don't think of yourselves as wanting to, work together or caring about reading each other's genres or whatever, you probably know a lot of other writers. So it's just a matter of mostly of finding people who can make the time commitment. Is the big important thing.
I'll just give a plug for the Writers League, in that we are doing these write-ins twice a month. And I think as we get going, first of all, you're going to see some of the same faces every time. And there is the opportunity to potentially meet writers there. But then I'll also just mention that our members, we do meetups once a month. And the whole goal of those meetups is to bring our members into smaller rooms on Zoom right now, and have them get to know each other, because sometimes you don't know other writers. Sometimes you really are you're a unicorn amongst your friends and family. And so whether it's with us or other organizations, there are ways to bump up against other writers and hopefully meet some people that could do that for you, because that is, I would agree, such a meaningful thing.
That's a really good point, Becca. I shouldn't have said that. I assumed everyone in the Writers League was all sitting in a room together, knowing each other. But yeah, but also taking a class is the other thing. I did not personally have to do that, but some other people I know found their writing people, because once you're in a class with someone, such as a Writers League class or something else, you have a chance to kind of suss out how someone's going to be, and if your styles are maybe simpatico.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, and I also love, Juliana just said in the chat box, creating accountability partners. I have friends who, they don't share their work with each other. They simply email each other once a week or whenever they're supposed to and say, yes, I did my writing this week. And for some people that makes your skin crawl, like, I don't want to be accountable in that way. But for some people, it's really helpful just to know there's another person out in the world who's wondering if you did your writing that week, and you want to make sure that they know that you did. So there's that idea too, whether it's actually getting to the stage where you're sharing material or you're just simply, you're in it together. Richard and Sherry, do either of you have thoughts about other people in your life, whatever, or other parts of your community that keep you motivated in writing, whether it's keep you accountable or just, you have someone who is your best reader and that they're waiting for those next pages or whatever it might be.
Richard, you can go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm jealous of Amy's writing group, writing circle, or whatever. That sounds really great and supportive. I've been in lots of workshops. I have an MFA, but I've also taken lots of workshops outside of the MFA program as well. And I think that's just really helpful. I don't really have those sort of weekly or monthly check-ins, although now I think I need to figure out how to get some. But I definitely have people who I know who have read my work in the past, and I'm pretty sure can read my work in the future, that I like I can hear their voices in my head sometimes when writing, and just working through different issues, which I think is helpful. So in a way, they're helping me, even though they don't even know it. And that's the benefit of being workshopped. I know the MFA is not realistic for a lot of people, but a 4-week writing class at a writing workshop through the library, through the Writers League, or through Austin Batcave is more reasonable. And then, make friends with those people. Every time I teach a class for the Writers League, I tell everybody, I was like, turn to the people around you and get their email addresses. I command you to do it. And nobody ever does it. And they should. It's a shame.
Yeah. Sherry, how about you? Anything in terms of sort of external forces that are keeping you accountable or keeping you going?
I live in fear of my critique partner. My critique partner is a harsh mistress. My last manuscript came back with 500 comments, and most of them were not happy about something.
That's a good thing. That's a good thing.
I know.
It's a good thing. It's a good thing. But this time I'm actually trying to this time I'm actually trying to figure out how to get a better draft to her, so I wouldn't have to cower under her wrath during revisions. But yes, she's actually a very nice person. But you can see, because genre fiction has much tighter deadlines, I think. A mystery series, you're expected to come out with a new book every year, or I think romance publish even more. Ever since I started doing things with Writers League of Texas, I've been called a prolific writer, and it always used to make my eyeballs fall right out of my eyes to hear myself called a prolific writer, because for romance I am slow.
Stay with us then.
Right. So these tough deadlines means when the draft go to my critique partner, they're not necessarily in the perfect shape, or I've barely managed to get the plot working, and so she comes down hard on character interaction, on scene tension. Last one, she dinged me really badly because in every single scene, people were drinking tea. She got so fed up of people drinking tea that this time, I think in this book, nobody dared drink any tea. My God, they were just and they were constantly in motion because she was just fed up of nobody moving. They were just talking. So I don't know about, my contracts keep me producing, and my critique partner make me keep an eye on the quality, even when all I wanted is just get some words on the paper. Yeah.
So this month, for the start of the year, we've been doing a series of classes, and I mentioned a couple of them at the top of the program, but they've been focused on more the business side of things. So submitting to literary journals, looking at fellowships and residencies, thinking about the agent search, and then when you're being published, sort of that publishing journey. So I guess I would ask each of you to switch gears a little bit about how you look ahead at a year with regard to any of those things. Do you think about sort of what is my year going to look at like in terms of, am I going to apply for a residency this year or a fellowship, or submitting things for publication for literary journals or contests and other things? Do you map out or look ahead at your year, or how do you even approach those different pieces of being a writer?
I'll jump in and say I don't now, but when I was writing more short stories, or if I were a short story writer, I think I definitely would be really aware of that. And whether that's through the websites like Duotrope or Poets and Writers that have like the nice like calendars of when journals open and close and when contests are. I think that's a good idea, right? You know, like if you're trying to publish short stories and poems or something else, then you know you don't want to submit to American Short Fiction the day before they're closing for submissions for 6 months. Like you just don't, right? Like you want to be there at the beginning, right? If you have
Really?
to, whatever, you'll be okay. But like you want to be in early, I think, for all of these places.
Slow down. Why? Explain.
Because I think that I use American Short Fiction. I'm just kind of like as a placeholder, because I think part of how human nature works in a lot of these journals is that they're going to get a lot at the end, which is when a lot of submissions towards the end of the deadline, which means the editors are going to get more stories to read. And at a certain point, you know, if a human being is reading your story, which they are, hopefully, then, you know, they might be biased because they've just read 25 short stories in a week, whereas 2 months earlier, maybe they only read 15 stories that week. And so they might, you know, it just changes how you look at things.
I love it. We're getting some inside scoop here from Richard. So being aware of those deadlines, mapping out, like that's one way to approach your year. If you're saying to yourself, your goal is to be published in a journal, perhaps that's a practical way of approaching that goal, which is understanding what that calendar year looks like. And I would think the same thing for fellowships and residencies and those sorts of things. Is there any other kind of business side of publishing when you look ahead to the year ahead of you that you guys are thinking about, or the goals that you're setting for yourself, that sort of thing? Amy, I'm looking at you because you're about to publish a book.
Yes.
A book on
Yes.
On the 2nd of February. So how does your year, what does your year look like in terms of just mapping out what you know as a writer? How do you even begin to organize the next few months of your life as a writer?
Great question. I'll get back to you on that. I was going to say that once you have stuff coming out semi-regularly, a lot of that, you know, it's less about applying for fellowships or residencies or submitting, you know, short stories or poems, and more about, for me anyway, professional development has to do with promotion and learning how to be a better advocate for my work, both in-house and then also with my audience. And so a lot of my goals are related to that. And I, you know, they may not be yearly goals, but they're more like for each book publication, I want to add some skill or some, you know, I want to aim to have like this kind of event, or I want to, you know, I want to learn how to do giveaways or be better with Instagram. Or, you know, I just learned how to use Instagram stories shockingly recently. and regramming, you know, these things are all really actually hard for me. They don't come naturally. The only thing that comes naturally is tweeting. I can do that in my sleep, but the rest of it is a steep learning curve. And frankly, even knowing how to promote on Twitter is pretty tricky at first too. So I just lost myself. I guess what I mean is the next 3 months are going to be, you know, taken up, I think, with trying to play through this latest round of promotion, play it all the way through as far as I can. That means this time around, what I've been doing is focusing on marketing specifically toward like my target audience, because I've learned over the past couple of books that my publisher is always looking for the widest possible audience, which, that's great. And that's what they do. But I know that there are people who are going to be specifically invested in the particular types of books that I write, who are not necessarily falling in that net. So my job has been to research, like in this case, it's academics and ex-academics, people who've been in grad school and feel disenchanted, and this particular book is for them. So how do I find those people? How do I reach out directly to them and get them invested and excited? And that's been like a goal that I think I've really, I've ticked off this year for the first time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, and in terms of like, and then of course, there's always new projects too. Usually my goal is that by the time I have a book come out, I have another one ready to sell, if not have already pitched it. That means having a significant chunk of a project done, whether it's good or not, as Sherry mentions, just having it ready to pitch, even like 50 or 60,000 words. And this past year I wasn't able to do it. The pandemic hit, we lost our childcare. It threw a wrench in things. And that's one reason I keep focusing. This year, I'm really trying to focus, especially on not forgiveness, but I guess acceptance, and just looking back and never calling anything a waste. Like I never want to look at last year, even if I missed a big deadline, I didn't have this project done. I should have, I had it planned out from the beginning of last year. Why isn't it done? Instead, I'm looking at my project and thinking, well, but I do have 30,000 words, or I do have 15,000 words. I did do something. And moreover, that time is never wasted. There are other things that came into my life that will develop into future projects. There are other interests that I ended up kind of developing because I wasn't focused on this big project. So that's just a long way of saying that with professional goals and writing goals alike, it's been really key to me to never get caught up in looking backward and thinking everything is ruined, everything is wasted, I failed. Because once you start looking at it as like, well, where am I now as opposed to where I was last year, you're always a little further along, even if you're not as far as you wanted to be. So yeah.
I think it's part of the reason I always enjoy introducing the professional or the publishing side of the goal setting into it, is because I also think that those things, first of all, I think sometimes we're not thinking about those at all. And so for especially the writers out there who are thinking maybe now is the time to start submitting some of your work to literary journals, or thinking about contests that might be appropriate for you, I think it's always good to keep that in mind. But also those are the things that can be great uses of your time, and you feel like you're still moving down the road, even when the words on the page aren't coming. So you have those other things you can turn your attention to. The words aren't coming today, so I'm going to nail Instagram stories and I figure out how to do that with this time that I have, because I'm motivated and I'm still going to be doing something. Sherry, what about you and the sort of the professional goals, the publishing goals?
I think in genre fiction, contracts are slightly different. Typically, in my experience, it's when I finish the last book in the contract, not when that book comes out. So, adult publishing often have shorter lead time. So if a book is coming out in October, often I would have just turned in, it would have just been accepted for copy editing, say, by February. And that's when my agent will go, okay, ask my publishing house, shall we do the next contract? So usually contracts are lined up ahead of time. And by the time I have a book coming out, I would have already started writing the next book, either in this contract or the first book in the next contract. And as I said, most of the time I try to let contracts be my external motivation. But sometimes, for example, in young adult, occasionally I write young adult books, and I have never been able to sell a book on proposal. In adult genre books, I have been able to sell on proposal, or just even on the next 3 books of the series, something like that. But in young adult, I've had to, either they wanted something from me sight unseen, as in when I wrote a adaptation of the Ballad of Mulan, or I needed a full manuscript. And I'm thinking, and I've had an idea that's been in my head for the longest time. And as I said, I usually only go ride the horse where it's going. And I only start to work if the urge to work is strong, because I prefer to play. So I have been working on other things, and my brain seems to be in okay shape. There's sometimes you just need to give your brain time to rest. You just can't keep working continuously, but my brain seems to be in okay shape. So I am thinking very seriously of, whether I can get a draft of a maybe shortish novel done, and then see what my agent says about it, then see whether she says there's any future for it as a young adult novel. If not, I'll write it as an adult novel, and I don't know, there's even less future for the weird ideas in young adult is where strange ideas should go.
How do you decide which, I'm sure it's dictated by contract as well, but I guess for you as a writer and just finding the pleasure in what you're writing, how do you decide which series you want to, do you have to make those decisions? I'm not going to focus on this other series because I want to really get the next few books in this series out, or are you really just tasking?
There are people who can do multiple series at once. That is not me. And people who do multiple series at once, I think they typically gauge which series to invest more their time, effort in by how much money that series is making. Because you have to be real. You only have this much time. So obviously, you are much more likely to give your effort to the series that makes more money. That said, for people who are writing fast enough, sometimes they will continue the other series for love, because their brain need a break from the other one.
Right.
And often my side project I write because I want to do different kind of storytelling to give my brain a break from whatever the rent-paying writing is doing.
And I love this question that just popped up, because I don't actually know the answer for each of you, but it's, what advice would you give to someone who has a full-time job outside writing but wants to make space to write? Curious about the panelist journey in becoming a full-time writer. Were any of you first working in other jobs and found your way into your writing career? So I guess, are all of you full-time writers and don't have another day job? And then can you talk about that moving from, if any of you did, from having a full-time other job into writing more and carving out the time for it and finding your way to being able to commit to it in that way? Anyone?
I'll start. I was a full-time grad student, and then when I came out of that, I decided not to pursue academics and a professor job, and so I can't say that I had a full-time job when I started writing the books, but I had a whole bunch of part-time jobs smushed together trying to make it. I was trying desperately to find a full-time job, but instead I was doing waiting tables, and I was doing online moderation, and I was just doing a bunch of stuff, teaching. I taught high school for a while. So I was cobbling together, and I did not have a lot of extra time, but I had more flexibility, I think, than most people, because with that kind of piecemeal thing, I didn't have one monolithic thing. So when it was time to retool my life, I could sort of take one piece away and put a smaller piece in its place. You know, I could sort of shuffle the jobs around a little bit more. That said, the way, you know, when I was at my busiest and I was trying to make time to finish Good Is Gone, my first novel, I did a lot of binge writing on retreats. I did not have the energy to write every day. I think people with full-time jobs who find, you know, who get up at 4 and write every day, more power to them. But, you know, I think it's not really plausible for most people, just in terms of energy. So I think, I mean, if that's, you know, a lot of people do it that way, but I think I've also heard a lot of people say that eking out like times, you know, specific times, taking a week off of work, for example, and doing house sitting gigs to get you out of your house for a week, or going to a writing retreat and to an Airbnb in the hill country for a 3-day weekend or something, wherever you can get the time in a big chunk to really be, you know, totally dedicated to it for a little while. Those were important to me when I was overtaxed in other areas of my life.
Yeah.
Sure. Do you still teach, Richard, right?
No, I haven't been teaching this.
Oh, okay.
year.
Okay.
So yeah, I've been taking on editing clients and doing freelance. But this is the hardest question, and it's one that it's probably the most common question because people need jobs. And it's hard to answer the question, right? It's kind of like Amy said, like, you know, the weekend away here or there, the getting up. Yeah, I don't think someone could get up at 4 o'clock every morning, every day, but maybe, you know, once a week. But I also feel like there's a little bit of a, with this question and some other craft questions, it's a little bit of a like, what does it mean to actually be a writer, right? So like, you know, I was able to start my novel while I was in the MFA program and then revise it over the summers, basically, while teaching high school. So like, that's like a time that I could say, yes, this is the time I was a writer. But like, you know, the 4 years, the like 7 years before I entered the MFA program, when I was in DC and taking an occasional class at night at the library and just, you know, trying to scribble short stories every once in a while, but not publishing anything at all, you know, that was like part of my training to be a writer as well. And then the years at UT as an English major, when I would have notions of going to coffee shops and writing novels, but never actually doing any of that. But I was still like taking literature classes, like that's also training. And then back through high school and back to this and back to that. So I think sometimes the pressure that people put on themselves is, well, I'm not a writer unless I'm finishing my novel, and I'm not a writer unless I've sold my novel and I've gotten an agent, and that took Ernest Hemingway 6 months, and so if it takes me 18 months, I'm a failure, and I'm 40, and I've got a kid. And I think it's that weird balance of like forgiving yourself and taking your time, but also knowing that you really do need to get critique partners, and you can only rewrite the first sentence so many times, but yet, you know, it's going to be bad before it's good. And it's really hard to like answer that question. You just kind of have to do it. And then at some point, someone will ask you the same question, and you'll go, and you'll kind of have the same response. I don't know if that's like a very long non-answer or if there's anything helpful in that at all.
I mean, I think maybe what you're saying is you can be a full-time writer, but you also might have a full-time job. Like you're not, when I was a literary agent, I had very few clients who did not have another way that they were making a living besides writing. and they were publishing and doing great things, but they were still, there was still a part of their life that involved making money in other ways. Sherry, what about you? What's your journey in this regard?
I am a full-time writer, and I think I've never had another full-time job. However, I was a full-time stay-at-home mom. And I had 2 kids who were like 4.5 years apart. And I started writing when my older one was 1.5. And I sold my first book when the little one was maybe right after he turned 5. So I wrote for 8 years. And during those 8 years, I had during those 8 years, 4 of those years, the kids were with me all the time. So during 4 of those years, I had a child constantly at home, either 1 or 2. And some other of those years, I had a child in school and another child in nursery school. So I had a few hours a day to myself. And I think the thing about me then versus me now was I had such a fire in my belly then. I would really take advantage of those few hours that I had to myself. And I was producing I wrote 5 full manuscripts in those 8 years. So it was a fairly constant rate of production, despite, and I would like to know I did not neglect my children to achieve those. It was all done, and I can't get up early either. I think I tried getting up at 4 o'clock. I think I just sat there doing nothing at all because I'm still asleep in my head. So my younger child always went to bed promptly at 8. So that helped a lot. That also gave me even when he was a baby, that gave me 3 hours at night to work on my stuff. And I really put those hours to use. So in a way, I guess whether you can find time to do it is directly proportional to just how much you want to do it. If this really is the #1 burning need in your life, you will find time. If it's, however, I have to say that childcare is maybe tiring, but it's not, it doesn't wring your brain out the way other jobs would, that require you to deal with people and solve problems all day long. And I think somebody like my husband with his current job would probably find it impossible to, at the end of the workday to sit down and write just because his brain is shut by the end of the day. So I perfectly understand that even if you have a burning desire, you may not find time during the work week to do it. However, a few hours from the weekend, you should be able to scrape together. And if you, even if you have children, you can kind of double up on childcare duties. Like in the time you are not writing, maybe you take care of somebody else's kid, have your neighbor's kid, your friend's kid. I mean, now we cannot do it. Now everybody has to haul their own ass on their own children, which is a terrible thing. I feel really, really bad for the mothers of young children during this pandemic. And I've said more than once that I feel so lucky that the pandemic only started after my children are all grown.
Yeah, that's right.
But if time were a little normal, you can double up on childcare duties so that then on some other weekend you can get somebody else to take care of your children and sit down and bang out some more words. And the thing about it is also if you're doing stuff that you still have space in your head, that greater cogitation time will actually also make the time you actually get to sit down more efficient. Mm-hmm. So, find the idea you love. I think you'll find time.
Yeah.
But
can I jump back in?
Yeah.
When I was teaching high school, which I did for 7 years, right? And I finished one novel and published it, and drafted another, and various essays and a few short stories, right? Before I started, right? So right after I graduated from the MFA program, a bunch of my friends in that program were like, why are you going to go teach high school? That's like the worst thing you can do for your writing. And I was like, well, I need a job and this is a cool high school. So let's just see what happens. And so some of them stayed at Texas State and took on like adjunct classes, like university classes, and make where you don't make a lot of money, let's say. Some of them stayed and kept doing like the bartending kind of thing. And some of them just kind of just took whatever, other kinds of jobs. And like none of those like was automatically going to make them more productive, right? Some of those adjunct professors had more time in the day than me by far, but they were also stressed out about money. They were also like still having to do office hours. They're still doing other stuff. Bartending, you know, being a waitress thing, like physically exhausting, really difficult. And yeah, so between August 21st and December 15th, I probably wasn't doing a lot of writing, but I could get a pretty good amount done between December 16th to January 3rd. And then over the summer and then spring break. And so I was able to keep up with, if not exceed some of those people from the MFA program, partly because like Sherry said, I valued that time a little bit more. Because I knew that it was so limited.
You really look forward to it. Yeah.
Yeah, like I have to get this done, right? There's maybe one of your like external deadlines.
One other thing that we haven't mentioned that I think ties in with this, and Sherry, you said when you get the time, it's more valuable to you, and your brain has been working on it in the background. You can also take a lot of notes. When I was waiting tables, even when I had my little notepad in the wait station, I would be jotting little notes. You know, if you have an idea that you're working on and you know, like, oh, I'm gonna get a week, but it's not gonna be for 2 more months, you know, or whatever. You can do a lot with just jotting in margins or having a little notebook that you keep kind of next to your work stuff. Because come on, I mean, even in an office job where you're sitting in a chair 8 hours a day, are you really working all that whole time? There's a little bit of staring off into space, a little bit of like playing around on Facebook on your phone, maybe. So, you know, you can let yourself just jot or outline or take notes or write a little bit of dialogue. And you can get a lot that way. Or like someone just said in the chat, that as a teacher, each day is full of stories. I found that too. I would also be like secretly, I would be seeing my job as like reconnaissance. Like if I ever want to write a YA novel, you know, I'm filing all these things the teens are saying away. And sometimes I'm even taking notes on the sly. And if you think of your day job as, you know, spy work for your creative life, that can also make it more interesting as well. In my genre, everyone's always murdering each other at their jobs, so I'm always looking out for environments where someone, you know, I overhear a little snippet of dialogue and I'm like, she sounds like she might murder that guy. To write that down.
I love this sort of, and we're wrapping up now because I'm aware of your time and our time, but that idea, you know, I think in some ways what you're saying, Richard, you don't impose a goal or a resolution or an intention on yourself that doesn't fit with the life that you have and the time that you actually have. So if you're teaching during the year, give yourself goals that speak to those times of the year when you're not, and when you know you're going to have the free time. And if you're someone who has to get up really early with kids or have certain things in the evening that you have to be doing, maybe don't tell yourself that you're going to write every morning, because you're just setting yourself up for not writing every morning. Look at the time you have and kind of build your goals realistically around that. And then the idea of carrying a notebook with you, the idea that your day job or your life really is observation. What are writers? You know, first and foremost, in many ways, they're observers, and that's how you create authentic work, is by watching people around you and getting a sense of, you know, humanity. So you can bring that into your work. So these are all, I love it. I'm getting really inspired by you guys, actually. Um,
I
yeah.
just want to say one quick thing. In writing, we talk about character motivation, right? So as writers, you should know yourself. I'm going back to the same thing. What motivates you? What do you want to do? It's much easier to resolve to do something you want to do than to try to push yourself to do something you don't want to do. What do you want to do? Go do that.
Yeah, I like it. All right, so we're
That was really good.
we're going to wrap up by each of you. I would love to give you the opportunity to talk about any specific thing that we should know, whether it's, whatever recent book you published that you want folks to know about. Do you have an event coming up that you want folks to know about? Anything that we can do so that everyone watching right now can turn around and find you and support you. So if you want to mention your website address or any sort of Twitter handle or what have you, let's do that. Sherry, I'm going to start with you.
Oh, my Twitter handle is just at Sherry Thomas. And I have my class with the Writers League coming up on February 3rd. It's a mystery class for people who cannot outline like me, but who wants to write interesting, plotty books. And I also have a more romance-focused workshop on February 6th, which is not with the Writers League, but with the Seattle romance writers. I think I might probably post something on my Twitter in the coming days, or maybe I did already past few days. I like to teach. So if any of you are looking for classes, please go ahead.
What's the most recent book out by you, or the next book coming from you?
Oh, the most recent book out is the 5th book in the Lady Sherlock series, which is called Murder on Cold Street. And if you would like to start the series, I would recommend you start with book 1. The Lady Sherlock is obviously a Sherlock Holmes pastiche, positing that Sherlock Holmes was a fictional character inspired by the exploits of a real-life woman named Charlotte Holmes. And the first book is called A Study in Scarlet Women.
It's such a great series, you guys. Seriously, check it out. And Amy, what about you? What are you plugging?
Yep. Well, I'm plugging this right here. It's called Bad Habits. It's my 3rd novel of suspense. It's coming out February 2nd. Woo, less than 2 weeks. And the event is on Writers League of Texas calendar. It's going to be co-sponsored by Bookwoman, and Laura Lippman's going to be there. We're going to talk any books that you buy, pre-order through Bookwoman or buy at the event through Bookwoman. I'll be signing stock, so I can personalize it for you. And it's just going to be, I'm really excited about this book. I think it's my favorite thing I've written so far. It's a book of my heart, so I'm excited to talk about it.
I love that jacket. It's a great jacket. Richard, what about you?
Definitely go to Amy's book release. That's a great book. It's really, really good.
Thank you.
And yeah, you can find me on Twitter. My novel, Trust Me, which I don't have a copy of, in arm's reach, which is like author failure. There you go. Thank you.
Look at her.
That's out now. You can, there are a couple signed copies at Malvern and at Bookwoman. That's where I think you should go if you want to pick one up, and I hope you do. And I spend too much time on Twitter.
I love it. You guys are great. Thank you so much for, especially given your, initial, negative feelings about resolutions, for being so open and willing to talk to us tonight and spend your time here. And I want to thank everyone who is in the audience for being here and for spending your Thursday evening with us. Thank everyone on YouTube. But yeah, I hope that everybody has a good 2021. Whether you make goals or intentions or not, it feels like there might be more light in this year ahead, and that there's a lot, hopefully, to look forward to. So glad to kick it off with you tonight, and take care, everyone, and have a good one.
Yay. Thanks so much, Becca, and Writers League of Texas.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Thank
Good
you,
night,
Becca.
Bye, good
Bye.
night.
Thank you. Have a good night, guys.
You too.